And thank you for joining me for today's live reading of Rogue by DeRudder Jackson, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. A bullet ricocheted off Baz Cormac's claymore, shooting somewhere into space. He executed a spin, the blade of his sword flashing in the glow of streetlights the civilians hadn't shot out yet. With both hands, he wielded his weapon in a downward stroke, and the warrior in front of him hissed in pain. "I take it you weren't expecting that." He let a smirk spread over his features as he awaited his opponent's response. "I don't know who the old witch has tricked into helping her train you, but you'll never best the warriors Skaha herself trains Baz. I'm always in it to win, but besting you isn't the goal. For some reason, Morrigan wants you alive. It's your lucky day, MacLeod." Like magic, the small army of rogues who gave as much allegiance to him as to their goddess joined Baz, surrounding his prize. Knowing better than to disappoint the goddess, he didn't question why they couldn't outright kill the Sheridan ally they'd managed to separate from his party. For some reason, his patroness wanted Ian MacLeod alive. She didn't specify that Baz deliver the warrior undamaged, however. A smug smile tugged the corner of his mouth as he watched the man's blood well up through the gash in his reinforced leather jacket. "Disarm him. Where he's going, I think the only sword he's going to need is the one between his legs." He chortled at his own bad joke. MacLeod glared at him. "Why, Baz? You were one of us. I looked up to you. We all looked up to you, even the Sheridans. What happened to you?" The question was rhetorical as MacLeod fought his capture rather than await an answer. Several of Baz's men sustained cuts and bruises before they managed to wrest the warrior's claymore from him, even in his weakened state. In the back of his mind, Baz hated the reminder that he and his fellow rogues didn't possess the training and skills of the warriors Morrigan sent them to fight. It was yet another slight he intended to address with their patroness when they delivered her prize to her. They may no longer be able to access a training room, but surely she could make peace enough with Belinus, the Celts Apollo, or someone to come in and train him and his men. As if he'd conjured her, the Morrigan herself appeared among them. "Well done, Baz. Thought it would have been better if you had been able to deliver one of his friends with him, say, Riley Sheridan." The silk in her voice didn't match the angry fires burning in the goddess's blood-red eyes. "The Sheridan's talisman is powerful. She was able to anticipate our moves somehow." "Baz, darling, excuses signify weakness." He chafed at her chiding in front of his men. They'd done well to separate one of her prizes from his friends, and she knew it too. As usual, the goddess's never-ending dissatisfaction stomped on his last nerve. "You still intend to uphold your part of the bargain. 1 extra year for each of my men, 3 extra years for me." MacLeod fought against his 5 captors who needed all their collective strength to maintain control of him. "You let her decide the length of your lives?" His voice rose an octave on the question. "You're better than this, Kieran. The Sheridans gave you back 14 years to find your talismans. Why are you fighting for Morgan to give you what is already rightfully yours?" The sound of his name, the one he'd used when he still had his honor, pissed him off. "You have no idea what you're talking about, MacLeod." With one well-placed uppercut to the warrior's chin, Baz shut him up for a minute. Taking him out the way when MacLeod stood before defenseless highlighted his honor, but that was a worry for another time, if ever. "Your rogues have 6 more months. You have a year." Morgan's blood-red aura haloed her, increasing her stature before their eyes. The freight train sound of rushing winds warned them, and Baz and his men dropped as one to the earth. For seconds that seemed like days, the winds tore at them. Then, as suddenly as they arrived, the winds dissipated, leaving the area around them cleared of downed gangbangers, fallen rogues, Ian MacLeod, and the goddess herself. After taking a minute to orient himself, he bounced up on the balls of his feet. It wouldn't do to let down his guard. With a goddess as mercurial as the Morrigan, a smart man knew to remain on alert. Always. As his fellow rogues gathered themselves, he assessed the casualties. They'd lost 7 men from their tiny band of 20. How the hell was he supposed to keep fighting for the goddess when she kept taking his brothers the way she did? It was another sore spot he wanted to take up with Anu, his true patroness, if she ever showed back up in America. He understood the Morrigan's desire to start a gang war in Denver's northeast neighborhoods. The city hadn't listened to the people for years, leaving the area ripe for unrest and simmering anger. Still, Morgan's cynicism sometimes surprised even him. The goddess truly had no care for any mortal beyond using them to entertain her bloodlust, emphasis on both parts of the word depending on her mood. Baz had no intention of giving his life to take care of her needs, either on the battlefield or in her bed. Who did she take across the ford with her this time? He asked Rory Harris, his second in command. Rory glanced around at the men, looking each other over, assessing damage. She got Devin, Logan, Jace, and Robert. He took a few steps to the edge of the light beneath the street lamp. And that peckerhead stand, he spit on the gravel at their feet. Good riddance. Baz glared at him and he shrugged. He was an asshole and you know it, Rory said. The only way to survive in this game is to have some loyalty to something. Stan didn't give a shit about anyone, including himself. Anyone else? Jamie Lennox, the cockiest rogue on his team, strolled up to join Rory and him, Jackson and Sully. Rory let out an anguished gasp, but Baz talked over him. Damn it, those were two of our best fighters. She promised them another year during our battle last month. Tearing his bandana from his head in disgust, he ran it down the blade of his claymore, cleaning the majority of gore off. He tuned it up when he returned home. No need to stick around Denver now. McLeod should keep the witch occupied for the time being. After the month she'd put us through, we deserve a vacation. I'm headed home. Anyone who wants to join me is welcome. Jamie jacked a brow at Baz for baiting the Morrigan the way he did, but he didn't care. The goddess didn't possess a shred of loyalty. He called her the way he saw her, a witch, evil as the blood-red pits of hell from which she undoubtedly ascended. Jackson and Sully were two of his best friends. In their world, friends were hard to come by. Every one of his mattered. Hence the time off for the remaining 12 men in the band. He'd have to work on finding and recruiting more rogues. The goddess probably had exactly that in mind when she sacrificed his friends. Deliberately, Baz visualized himself into the backyard of the house he shared with Rory. Now. Jackson and Sully used to have rooms in it too. Selling off their trucks and all their personal effects would cover the rent for several months. The thought should have cheered him, but after 3 years of losing guys to the never-ending battles Morgan waged all over the world, he couldn't find the requisite enthusiasm for not having to find another part-time civilian job to cover the rent for a while. That was another thing the goddess obviously cared nothing about. Warriors living alongside civilians had to keep a low profile. Even rogues such as his friends and himself. It wouldn't do for some civilian to figure out exactly who and what they were. Supernatural powers could only take a man so far, especially a rogue like him who had never found his talisman. The wrong civilian stumbling onto them at the wrong time could spell disaster for all of them. He didn't relish a life in a civilian prison. Taking his time, he checked the area around his house for any signs of a breach caused by a civilian or a warrior. Satisfied with the integrity of his various traps, he stepped around one and let himself inside. Rory always flipped shit about his precautions, but Baz noticed that Rory always followed him several minutes after he'd visualized himself home from wherever the goddess sent them. After living through whatever event Morgan concocted, none of them wanted to come home to more battle. They were rogues, not animals, no matter how warriors, talismans, and druids might view them. For the most part, they were in their situation through no faults of their own. Except for Jamie, every one of his men was well over the age of 30. Baz had become their leader through cunning and sheer force of will. His men followed him because he had a track record of besting warriors in battle. Before he'd passed his 28th birthday unbonded, he'd trained regularly with warriors of strength and honor. Having grown up on Flathead Lake in Montana, there had even been a time when he'd counted the Sheridan brothers among his friends. A warrior family Skahawk had favored for centuries, all of which meant he had some battle skills over other rogues didn't. Usually, he put them to use against the warriors Morgan sent him to fight. When they didn't give him a choice, he used those skills against other rogues. Seated at his kitchen table, he went to work cleaning and oiling his claymore. He'd rather be cooking or sleeping or having sex after a battle, but taking care of his weapon took precedence over his physical desires. Did you at least start something to eat? Rory asked almost simultaneously with visualizing himself into the middle of their kitchen. Not yet, he grunted. You can call for takeout as easily as I can. The way you make love to that sword, I'd swear it was your mistress, Rory snorted a laugh. Keeping his attention on his work, Baz didn't dignify his lieutenant's comment with a response. After a couple of minutes, Rory gave up and pulled out his phone. Baz heard him place an order with a local pizza parlor, which alerted him to the time. 1:30 in the morning. No wonder sex had been last on his list of ways to unwind from their most recent battle. The old witch had kept them fighting for most of the night. Satisfied with the sheen he polished on his weapon, he sheathed it and returned it to its designated spot in a cleverly hidden cupboard near the front door. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, he headed to his bedroom and a hot shower before the pizza arrived. It wouldn't do for a civilian to see blood spattered all over his leather jacket and jeans, never mind the gore that no doubt decorated his face and hair. Standing beneath the hot spray, Baz finally relaxed for the first time all summer. Over the past 2 years, the Morrigan had taken a beating at the hands of the Sheridan clan. She'd done her damnedest to take one or all of the brothers and their parents and talismans across the ford, but they all had eluded her. From what he heard, even their close friends had escaped her clutches. There had been a time once when he counted himself among their friends. Even though he was 3 years older than Rowan, the oldest Sheridan brother, he'd spent as much time as possible with the family. After all, they had a training room, one they trained in regularly, often with Skahak, the warrior trainer herself. When he reached his 28th birthday without finding his talisman, he had 3 choices: go into hiding for the rest of his life, try to outrun the goddess and her minions, or join her and fight against his brothers and friends. It wasn't in his nature to hide, and he damn sure had no intentions of dying on the end of some other rogue's sword for the goddess's pleasure, which left joining her. Fortunately, he knew how to shield his thoughts from others, something he'd learned from Owen Sheridan, the Sheridan patriarch and one of the most formidable warrior masters in the community. There was no way Morgan could ever breach his shield to discover what was truly on his mind. For 3 years, he'd been working on a plan to amass an army of rogues, one he could offer in service to the other deities in the pantheon and return for protection from the supreme war goddess herself. Fate had stolen his opportunity to be a warrior, which he decided meant he could play by his own rules. Up till now, there were only 2 classes of Celtic fighters: warriors and rogues. Baz thought it was time for a third: mercenaries, with him as their leader. The battles the Morrigan had insisted on all summer seriously set back those plans, especially with the loss of Jackson and Sully. Rory was an accomplished fighter, but he lacked some of the other rogues' skills. It went without saying that he couldn't trust Jamie, though he might have no choice but to promote the man, possibly even offer a room with Rory and now him that there was space. Thinking once again about the goddess's perfidy, he nearly cracked the shower tiles with his fist. Something McLeod said before she whisked him away niggled at the back of Baz's mind. The Morrigan told her rogue warriors that the curse Rowan and Alyssa Sheridan's marriage had lifted on warriors only extended to those coming up, not to those who had already passed age 28 alone. But what if that was a lie? What if he still had a chance to find his fated mate? And if he found her, how would that work for his plans?